Hi, Lydia. I'm so excited to connect with you and have you on the podcast today.
It's so good to see you. And I think we're not too far in terms of
Mm.
location to each other. I'm in Bali at the moment.
Very close. I think it's a 6 hour flight, so
Yeah,
not
we're
too
in the
bad.
same time zone-ish. It's morning.
Ish. I am so excited to learn about your work. And when we first connected, I went and had a bit of a squiz around, and we have so many shared values about passion and purpose and work. But I would love to hear from you in your words. Can you tell us all a little bit more about the work that you do?
Absolutely. I'm glad you had a little visit to my site, which I think, gives a good sense of sort of where what I believe in and what I value when it comes to supporting people to not just escape corporate. I know my company name's called Screw The Cubicle. So a lot of the obvious thing that people think about is, okay, this is the woman that helps me to maybe lie on a beach all day and not be working at all. But it's actually the pure opposite. To me, the cubicle kind of represents a very, traditional way of how we get to careers and building our body of
Mm,
work in ways that we've sort of understood how to do it from school to working the corporate world. But what I'm sort of here to do is really support people in finding meaningful work and the right work to be doing in the world, so that work doesn't feel like it's that 9 to 5 window, right? Of like, I'm just here to pay the bills, I'm here to clock in and clock out, but a sort of reinvention of work, right? That allows people to
mm,
see that they're making a valuable contribution. And I think that's an innate human desire to feel on purpose, to feel like there's a reason to get up in the morning beyond just making a living in the
mm,
traditional sense. So my official title is I'm a work reinvention coach and a solopreneur strategist. So I primarily help mid-career professionals that have sort of done a very the same trajectory of a career, that they kind of see how their own peers or colleagues have done it in the past, but they're feeling unfulfilled. And it may not be the work itself, but the environment perhaps of how they've had to facilitate that work.
mm.
And they're really interested in being more in control of where their next chapter of work is supposed to be. So I help them really figure out, what is their next chapter? Do they want to keep doing what they're doing? Or is there a point of reinvention here, a way that their work can evolve? I'm a big
Mm.
believer in that we don't kind of have to throw the baby out of the bathwater. It's not like, let's set our degrees on fire and, flush down all our 20 years of experience doing something great. But to be more creative in how we translate some of our gifts
Mm.
into a different cause, helping different people, right? Or even learning, right? Like if you've been 20 years a doctor, for example, there's things you agree with and not and don't agree with anymore. And how does that help you to support a new wave of thinking, a new
Mm.
innovation in medicine, perhaps, right? That could be quite interesting to solve, right? And then once we get to the crux of what I call the sweet spot for meaningful work, then I help them launch that work in a solopreneurship model that creates more simplicity, more creativity. And for me, as someone who really values her lifestyle, I also really think a lot about what's going to help people launch quickly, but in ways that aren't complicated, because we are filled with so much noise in the online
Mm.
business world, what we think we have to do to be successful, that we have to build really large empires to be sustainable.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a believer in, Paul Jarvis wrote a book called Company of One. It really
Mm.
resonated with me. And it's that small business is the next big thing, you can still make a great living not having a huge empire and being the next Tony Robbins. Like, you could have a cozy business, you could have a boutique brand and have very different decisions to be made in that business. So I really help people support people to create that model that's really right for their style of working as well.
I have so many questions, but I fully align with this idea of so many things that you mentioned there. One of them being that I personally am very critical of the way that we're brought up in especially in more Western societies, of
Mm,
the industrial age thinking of following that production line. You get up at this time, you go and do, at school, you go to school at this time, you have your break at this time, then you do this and you do this, and then this is the outcome. And that's just preparing everyone for the traditional corporate workplace. How have you found that in your own journey, navigating the transition that needs to happen, not just in a, okay, now I'm this solopreneur and I have to do this on my own, but also to recondition your own thinking from the way that that is really instilled in many of us, without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but also knowing that there's a huge identity shift that happens when we start creating our own way to do things.
That is such a good question. And you hit the nail on the head, saying that there is an identity shift that has to happen when we have a career change. So when we traditionally had a career change, when you went to a career counselor, and I went to a lot of them when I was first transitioning, and I remember thinking, paying, I think, like $600 to the biggest university in British Columbia, which is where I'm from, Vancouver, Canada. And they spat out this report. It was a 3-hour assessment, but it basically measured my skill sets, experience according to the most traditional careers. So they spit out in a report, top 10 careers meant for you. And my number one career choice was ESL school teacher. Because I used to work in language schools, being a business development director, but it was sort of measuring metrics that were really practical and sort of not, in my opinion, no one spoke to me. I didn't speak to a counselor that kind of went, what makes you like, what are you interested in? What are some things that you believe in? The sort of more higher level questions of not just my skills, because skills is a tool. I can use my tools for so many things, right? And that's the confusing part, that I think not everyone really supports people in tying in some themes and patterns and history and sort of a newfound, what are they looking for in terms of even their own fulfillment for work? Like, how do we know we've met that level of satisfaction and fulfillment, rather than just, I'm good at it, right? That cannot be the only metric of success, right? And so when I was first beginning my corporate transition, oh my God, I had my 10-year anniversary, by the way, in 2023. So that's going to be a big milestone. But when I was going through my own transition, one of the biggest things I had to grapple with and navigate was my attachment to this definition of success, that not only what society has told me that's what it looks like. I come from an immigrant family. I come from a family that immigrated from Malaysia when I was 10 years old, that sacrificed a lot to give me some first world privileges. And even though we grew up quite poor and, really needing to work hard to earn our living, I still had access to good education and benefits and things like that, being a Canadian citizen. And that identity belonging to, a daughter of an immigrant, that comes with some guilt and shame if I was to give up a good thing, right? That my family worked really hard to allow me to have access to. And at the time when I left corporate, I was in the highest peak of my career at 26, 27 years old. I was at the midst of being offered a partnership to the company, which I was the youngest person to be offered that. I was making the most money I've ever made. It was sort of a dream come true on paper, but I was really burnt out working to get to that level of success. And I remember thinking, oh gosh, I've climbed the corporate ladder and done all the great things, check, 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 all the things you're supposed to do to get there. But the view isn't what I'm expecting. I'm not happier. I'm not more fulfilled. I no longer have time to do the things I really enjoy. I'm working in quite a bit of a toxic environment that makes me feel not good when I enter into the office space. There's so many other things that I think contributed to that. And I wish I had this intuitive moment and said, you know what, you deserve better. There's bigger things for you. I didn't think that, because I thought this is just normalized. It's what everyone else I saw was doing that was getting to that level of success. There were sacrifices that you would have to do in order to get there. And it wasn't until I suffered a health scare and a very bad burnout that happened to me so basically I was in Russia for a business trip, and I developed temporary agoraphobia in a hotel room from having so much stress. I hadn't taken a holiday for 3 years at that time, jet lagged, obviously overworking 60, 70 hours a week. And my body just sort of went, enough is enough. Here's a symptom to stop you.
Yeah. Yeah, you're
And
not
that,
paying attention to the minor
yeah,
cues. So here's a big
exactly.
one.
Your mind seems to be really stubborn. We're just gonna
Mm,
put you down for a bit physically. And that was one of the most scariest thing that happened to me overseas, right? Not
yeah.
knowing anyone and being ill. But it was also the catalyst for change for me to
Mm,
make me look at the choices I was making in my life, that even though I was checking all the boxes, I also had to really make sure that the boxes I was checking were boxes that I wanted on that piece of paper, versus what unconsciously was fed to me from my own parents, right? Who
mm,
were very
mhm.
loyal to the companies they were with. And, nobody ever quit their jobs and no one ever did anything any different. You get in line and you do what it takes because we don't have that many opportunities. So,
Mm,
that's what you do. And so
mhm.
even navigating that, understanding that my narrative and my story and my opportunities and my personality and my values might be different from my family's, that was a huge part that I
Yeah.
still have to work on today because I
Yeah.
live in Bali. I live a very unconventional life. I don't have children. I'm not married, right? There's all these things that people will say, oh, something's wrong, right?
Mm,
Something's wrong with
mhm.
that choice, right? And having to battle that day to day and go, no, that's my choices. It might not be ideally what you see out there, but these are choices that are right for me. And so that piece of even understanding the background stories that come with your identity, right? That is
Yes.
unconscious to us until we really look at them, and really understanding what we want to keep. I love the tenacity of my parents that made it happen, as new immigrants. That's always stuck with me, to be a
Mm,
bootstrapper, to really go after things. I don't want to give that part up,
yeah.
right? But there were parts of that, sort of scarcity, right? We don't get many opportunities. Put your head down, work really hard, work twice as hard as everyone else to get somewhere. That is no longer needs to be my narrative,
Mm,
right? So
yes.
working with that through therapy, working with that through trialing myself in other ways of living, that really aligned me back to, I think, the core, my own purpose, my own reason to exist in the world, right?
Mm,
And I think another big one, Catherine, was this art of exploring and playing with ideas, which I don't know, with people who are listening who have like Asian parents, like, what is play? There's no such thing. We choose the career and vocation that's going to give you the most security, and that's the thing you go. When
mm,
my parents made me play the piano at a young age, it wasn't because I liked the piano. It's because every brilliant kid apparently plays the piano, and you're sort of just put in boxes, right, to
yeah.
have this, what would they think is a thriving life for a child. um,
Mm,
but even I think in traditional society, we aren't encouraged to sort of experiment for a bit for certain things, try things on for size, try on this coat of this one piece of work or something and see if I enjoy it. Let me
yeah.
just not have an objective about it being a career or of it being a business right away, and just
Mhm.
letting me simmer in that space for a minute to see how I feel. Right. That's like
Yeah.
not what we're really encouraged to do. We're encouraged to, you better pick something correct after high school, and you better cross your fingers that that's a vocation that's going to pay for your life. And you go into that vocation and then you get a job and then you just do that, like
Yeah.
ongoing forever and ever after more.
Yeah, pretty
Right.
much.
And then as adults, if you felt that this line of work is not for you or something's changed for you, you're not really allowed to make that change that easily. It almost feels
Mm,
irresponsible. It almost
mhm.
feels you're not adulting,
Yeah.
right? But I remember thinking when I was in college, like, the idea of internships was really encouraged a little bit for us at that age. That we're like, okay, go and see if that's the niche of that industry you really want to go into. Go and work for free. Go and volunteer. Go and do these things to dabble into some ideas,
Mm,
right? But as
mhm.
adults, it's almost like internships are forbidden.
Yeah.
You should know. You have to know what you're doing immediately
Mhm.
and go and be an adult. And I think that's such a lost opportunity, for whatever age we're at. If we have an inclination to do something different, we should have that permission for ourselves, or to give it to ourselves to explore ideas without it having to mean anything right away.
Mm,
And I think that's one thing that I wish I did, a bit more when I first started. But I just, everything had to be so sure and certain for
mhm.
me to make a move on it, and knowing what I know today, I think the art of exploring, testing things, figuring things out from small little projects to start with, doesn't have to be huge things. That has really led me to, right, more clarity in what's next for me.
Mm. So good. I really want to ask you about the overworking, overachiever characteristics, because I
Mhm.
know there are a lot of people in my space who'll probably be listening to this who will absolutely relate. But before we go down that path of what you're saying, I really want to touch on, because as a white person, I don't have the lived experience of having immigrant parents and that experience. I know that we have a diverse audience here. I would really love to just ask you for a sec, for people who are, in that place in their life. So yeah, maybe not even in the early decision-making place of the start of their careers, but are in that late 20s, late 30s, early 30s, of how to, still love your parents. And as you mentioned so beautifully, that you admire so many things that you have got from them and learnt from them, but be able to have those difficult conversations when you have been brought up a certain way and there is a certain expectation of what you will give back to the family, but also just like the cultural difference in
Right.
growing up in Canada, where that would not seem that big of a change, but for your parents it is a big change. Do you have any tips or thoughts on someone who's trying to navigate that themselves in this space?
Mm. That's such a good question. And thank you for acknowledging that there's different experiences for different cultural backgrounds and traditions. Um, One of the things that I realized early on, when I first decided that I was going to leave my job, for example, one of the first people I told was my mother. And now thinking back, that was not probably the best decision I could have made. Now, here, what I thought in the beginning of time was that, well, yeah, people close to me should know my intentions because that's what I'm working towards. But what I actually think is around this beginning stage of transition, we have to admit that at this phase of the game, things feel really shaky. Things
Mm.
feel scary. Things feel uncertain. So it is truly important at this moment of that phase to be very careful about who you tell your dreams to, because
Mm.
you too are emotionally on a bit of shaky ground. So we need a lot more allies. We need a lot more support systems that aren't going to question our choices, that aren't going to feed doubt into our minds, because we are in that stage of relying on other people's courage, support, encouragement, right? To be able to kind of step up boldly, to even take the next micro step, to even entertain this idea of doing something different, right?
For sure.
And so when I revealed that to my mother, and not her fault, her way of parenting, especially Malaysian ways, is all about their language of love, by the way, is about warning you
Yes, of
of all the
course.
horrible things that will happen to you if you make this decision.
Mm.
And I never understood that because I used to say, why are you raining on my parade? Why are you, I have this beautiful dream for my life and you're like poo-pooing on it, and then we'll get into an argument. But I'm not doing, I love you. And that's why I want the best for you. And then nothing ever gets resolved because I'm believing she doesn't love me. She's like, hello, I am loving you. This is my language of love.
You're
But,
terrifying me.
scaring you into submission is the
Yeah.
favorite tiger Asian mom way, right? But now that I have more tools as a more mature adult as well, I would have gone back to that conversation and realized that, first of all, that is her language of love. I have to honor that. I don't have to believe it or accept it, but I can absolutely acknowledge it. And acknowledging it sounds like, thank you so much for thinking of me. Yeah, those are some of the things that, are some concerns. And it's something for me to work out, right?
Yeah.
Instead of why you're trying to rain in my parade, which didn't go anywhere. But
Yes.
more importantly, like when I work with my clients who are women of color, men of color, right, that have, there's like a real risk sometimes in revealing what you're going to do. It's not just people poo-pooing on your dreams. There are times where the risk is you could be excommunicated from the family. You could not be, there's like shame and guilt that can come with these conversations that affect your self-confidence and courage in a much deeper way. And so you may not want to have that conversation with sometimes your parents until you're at that stage where you do feel solid in some foundations that you've been building, that you have this, you're filled with support systems that have given you that level of courage, that even though if they poo-poo it a little bit, you're not completely drained because you're running on empty of encouragement and support, right?
Yeah, sure.
And then you have more tools, more, right, self-advocacy for yourself to face the music, if that is to come. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes we do have supportive parents that know how to support properly, right? But my advice is always curate your little team of support in the beginning of time carefully. They may not actually be your friends. They may not actually be what you think are the people you confide into. When I quit my job, it was during an economic crisis in Vancouver where my friends were being laid off. So when I'm telling them I'm going to quit a great 6-figure job and a partnership to pursue this thing called entrepreneurship, of course they were scared. So they were telling me things I don't want to hear either, that were like, you should be lucky to have this job. How dare you give up something that everyone else is looking for at the moment? Again, not their fault. They are also, I think people tend to project their own fears onto other people. So when they're saying the things that you should be watching out for, they're kind of saying it to themselves too, right? They too kind of are scared of that and want to make sure that you don't run into the same mistake or those same problems, right? And so for me, it's been really important to encourage my clients to think about even new communities, new networks of people that have the point of view they have now, that are changing their lives in ways and value systems that are similar to the way that they want to see life and see the way that they grow. And those are the people to brainstorm your plans, talk about your life, make mistakes with, because they're not going to shame you for making that decision, because that's also the kind of vision that they have with their lives as well.
Absolutely. I always think of it as like a little seedling. So when you're just starting out on a new endeavor, like starting a business, which is a big thing, it's like a little baby seedling and it hasn't got roots yet. And so you have to be really careful of who you talk to about it because of how fragile it is in that moment.
Exactly.
And so I think that analogy works so perfectly with what you've said, because once it's grown roots and it's a bit more firm ground.
Yeah, beautiful.
Right? It gives you the ability to step out and share it more openly and be able to weather the storm when there's people who we love the most, of course. Maybe do have some fears and worries around it, being able to weather that storm when you've got those roots in a little bit more. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Really well said there. Definitely.
So the next question that I have for you is, as you've been talking so far today, what Screw the Cubicle actually feels like to me is not so much ditch the 9 to 5, get out of the corporate workspace, but what it really feels like is this idea of let's stop thinking in a 3x3 square.
That's right. Yes.
Let's bust out of the way it's always been done, the way we think we're supposed to fit. This is what life is supposed to be like. Yeah, we're supposed to hate our jobs and hate Mondays and bitch about all these things. And one thing that definitely, I've been in business nearly as long as you have, and I didn't come from a traditional corporate career, but I definitely came from one that was a decision I made when I was 15 years old and way too young to make a decision about my whole life, that did require an unraveling of the identity of what it's like to work in like a pretty cool creative industry. But even still took years to unravel the socialized conditioning of what work is and what you're supposed to do on a Monday, and sitting at the desk at 9 a.m., whether I felt like it or not, on 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, and then years and years passing and realizing this is my business to make the rules on. It can look how and feel how I want it to be. But this is something that I see over and over again, and especially in the entrepreneurial space, because there are so many people supporting other new entrepreneurs. How do we encourage that creativity and getting out of that little cubicle in amongst the, hey, join my program and I'll teach you this 6-step process, or I'll help you do this, and actually really get the message out about how this is your thing to make your own, as long as you're not hurting anyone else. It's about your rules and not just slipping back into the hamster wheel of what we've been conditioned into, which is really hard to do. I know this is a big question.
Absolutely. Like I always say, you know, we can get the girl out of the corporate world, but the corporate mindset can absolutely follow, you know, the entrepreneurship pathway as well. I'm a prime example of that. I had my second massive burnout in 2015 during one of my highest revenue year in my business. And that was due to me doing this, exactly what you were saying, not being conscious about that I'm allowed to build this business in a way that I see fit. That wasn't a permission I knew I could give myself. You know, I was still following in a lot of ways that trajectory of looking at the person ahead of me and seeing what they're doing. So when I was, you know, in my year when I launched my coaching practice was around 2013, you know, Marie Forleo, for example, was huge. I mean, she still is. She's great and beautiful. But it didn't, just because I admired Marie didn't mean that I wanted to build an empire like she was building, for example, right? So when I was making decisions about what products I should be offering, how I was doing this, what suites of offerings do I have every single year, it was done in a way that was very unconscious, which is, this is the trajectory of how a coaching practice looks like. You've got a mini course, and then you lead them to the blah, blah, blah. And then you have a lead magnet, and then you have these courses, then you launch again every quarter, and then you have retreats, and then you have a book. And that, you know, right? It's like, and I mean, I'm exhausted just really all those things already. But to me, that was very normalized that, oh yeah, all coaches have 8 products to sell every single year. And so then I started hiring people. I had a full team going on. I wasn't writing my own blogs anymore. I wasn't, you know, like, and what that did, even though it again, on paper, funny how that story follows me, on paper, I looked really successful, but personally, I was no longer being a coach and doing the work that I enjoyed doing. I actually became more of a marketer, which was not what I signed up for, but all of a sudden I have to deal with these funnels and, oh God, you know, like, what am I doing? Trying to learn all these things I'm not that great at, when actually my business may not require all these bells and whistles to operate in a way that I want it to operate. And the one big thing that having that burnout taught me, first of all, taking a sabbatical, taking a break, not trying to solve the problem when you're unrested, stressed, and overwhelmed, taking a bit of distance from the thing itself, and coming back to me, you know, remembering what I had to figure out when I had my first burnout. You know, I had to redefine again. First of all, was redefining success, right, during that time of leaving corporate, and now it's redefining what is good enough work, what is good enough income, what is a good enough model, what's a good enough lifestyle for me, and then be more intentional about adding in the elements of offerings or team or revenue that lets that conclusion of that goal happen. That the idea and the big shift for me is not that bigger is always better. Maybe it's not. Maybe better is better. Maybe focusing on one thing and doing that really well is not a bad call. You know, maybe that if I wanted to have a cozy boutique brand that isn't the next Tony Robbins or Marie Forleo in the world, that's okay too, because I enjoy intimacy. I enjoy having long-term clients that I work with personally. Some people don't like that. I really love one-on-ones. I really love a small group. When I look at my personal life, I hate crowds. Everyone thinks I'm an extrovert. I'm actually more of an ambivert and have introvert qualities. I like to be alone. I like to simmer and speak to people in very small containers. And so here I am building these large courses, large retreats, large everything. I was not in my zone of genius. You know, so work felt harder. Work felt more, oh, I can't seem to get all the things I want to get done because the layout of how I was facilitating my work didn't support me in being that version of who I was, right? And during that time, I read a really great book called Company of One by Paul Jarvis, which I really loved because it was like giving me permission to go, hey, wealthy, successful people can have this model. It's possible. You just don't hear about them very much because they're busy having a life. They're not building this huge ass brand that's on every social media platform. Most of them are not even on social media, which was like, great. Right. So that really shifted my thoughts around what's possible simply by seeing someone I respect and admire in terms of prioritizing his lifestyle choices. That is possible. And that helped me get into the trajectory of, again, restructuring my business, my work, how I showed up for clients, what were the boundaries of what I do and don't do, and that, doing better things, being more focused in growing something with that attention might be better than having scalable products, that are 8 offerings a year, which might be really exhausting. So that's my sort of transition into solopreneurship, where I still work with teams. I just don't work with them every day. I don't want to manage people. I love hiring people way smarter than me, paying them great money, and they help me in parts of my business. So I'm more project-based teams. I don't work with someone full-time, which is great. I have a flexibility in my years where I can take 3 months off a year if I wanted to, as long as I plan for that to happen for me. And I am someone that needs longer breaks, for example. So that is kind of designed into my model every single year, right? And so I tell you that story because I think that is a really good look at what can happen if you don't pay attention to
oh my gosh,
how
so
you're
much.
built.
Yeah. And
right?
also, like, sometimes just shutting out the noise of what we think everything needs to be, right?
Exactly.
Like that should be what we're all working towards, and it's that or nothing. Like, you're either successful or you failed. And I just love that story so much. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Just so
and
good.
Also back to what you were saying about the noise, right? I think we live in a world where there's that sort of paradox of choice, right? As well. So the more different types of things we see out there, the more confused we get about where do I start? Everyone's saying something different. Now, I'm a big believer in looking at people as just like what I did with Paul Jarvis with Company of One. Is really powerful when you have witnessed someone that's doing the thing you thought may not be possible. That gives you bravery to sort of keep trekking towards that path. But before that phase happens, sometimes we're in that no man's land of like not quite sure what's the thing for us. And that's when I think you're right. It's a really good idea to like maybe just mute your Instagram for a bit. Just don't go on social for a little while or subscribe to all the newsletters that you think you have to subscribe to, and take that necessary pause for a minute to just really think about if you were the cook in the kitchen, if you could make a role for yourself, as you said, right? If you could, I really just imagine a day-to-day of what your life looks like, right? And be focused on your own intuition, your own needs, your own, I work with 80% introverts, so their way of working with clients and projects and timelines are very different from an extrovert, for example. Like, what's your style of working? How do you want to earn a living? What are sort of the types of tasks even that it's like, oh, this is my thing. I love it. I could do it for hours, right? What are those things? And thinking about how do you want your model to look like? What do you need more time off every year? Do you have some of my clients have a disability where they cannot work 40 hours a week. They can only work 20. Right? That's something to acknowledge and account for. If they've got 3 children and they're a single mother, there's other priorities again in their way of working that requires them to have a different role that is important to them, right? So mapping that out, you don't have to know what the model is, but even just knowing the ingredients that we have to put into the pot so that when right? Like that can then I think you have a little bit more context so that when you go back out there into the wild, wild west of social media and the internet, you can start to think about or look for people that represent those values too. Right? People that go, hey, cozy is better. Small business is great. Or I'm a single mom too. Here's sort of how that's happened for me. So you're following the right people that actually help you live out your values rather than only tracking people who are successful, but maybe they got to that level of success or version of success in ways you don't want to go there. That's important, right? Like everyone has their pathway, of success, but not every pathway is right for you. And so knowing yourself first and then being able to curate again, right? The communities, the allies, the coaches, the support systems that are meant for your type of way of working or living, then I think you have a much better chance of being influenced more positively, right? Than making you feel bad about yourself.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Anyone who's listening to this will just be like, oh, this is Lydia is the perfect person to have on this podcast. It's literally everything we talk about on here. And I was having this conversation with the Emerge and Expand group. So I have a membership that is a kind of part of this podcast. And we were talking about this morning around a topic that's quite, not talked that much about in our industry, but around ethics and values. Totally. And how important it is to actually work out your own first, but also, like you said, when you are observing, when you are looking for people who are doing it in a way that you would like to do it, how positive an influence that is. And then also sometimes how we can take less positive experiences that we inevitably have along this journey as a way of acknowledging that, hey, everyone's out there doing their thing and they all have sovereignty over the decisions that they're making in their businesses. Absolutely. But also then coming back to our internal guide point of, okay, well, how does that feel for me? And, oh, that's a really great lesson because that's something I would never do in my business. And not necessarily from a place of judgment, but actually just from continuing to work the muscles of our own ethics and values and integrity so that we can be making decisions from that place in our business. Yes. Because success looks different for everyone.
Exactly. That's so beautifully said. And you're absolutely right. I think that I kind of look at that almost like when we know our own metrics, right? That was a huge part for me as well. Yeah. Understanding my metrics of good enough money. What does what does rich look like for me? What does feeling wealthy look like for me? I know the internet tells me it's 7 figures and 8 figures. I live a different life. I don't need the Lamborghinis. I don't need the Prada bags. I like to have time. I like to, even my trips and things like that. I'm not on a yacht all day, right? Like it's a very different, you have to define what wealthy, rich, comfortable, right? Feeling generous to your family and friends. What does that look like for you? And how much would it cost for you to live your kind of life, right? That might be more simple and might be not extravagant, because why is 6 and 7 or, even 6 figures? Some people don't need 6 figures to make a great living. We got to stop sort of telling people that that's the metric of success that they should be looking for. And they're not there, then they're not measuring themselves up to the right stick kind of thing, right? Yeah. But metrics to me is so much more than just how big a model a business is or how much money they're making. Is also the fulfillment parts of that job or that interaction with clients. One of my biggest metrics to know I'm successful is when I actually show up having fun with clients. Like fun is a metric. If I'm not having fun, it's the wrong thing, right? Yeah. And I think knowing these different, right, metric points, however you define those for you, can really act as a compass. Yes. So that when you're out there in the wild west of opinions and viewpoints and the latest trend and hacks, your compass will go, oh, that's interesting. I can see how that's going to work, but that's not something I'm willing to do, or something that resonates with me deeply. Yeah. Go on. Yeah. Keep doing that. I root for you from the side, but not my thing. Moving on, right, to something else that's more in tune with the way that I want to build my pathway to success.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, that was yes. I definitely just agree with everything.
I know, I'm so glad you mentioned this. It's such a big thing of mine as well that I like to talk about.
I want to keep talking, but this will end up being so huge.
I know, we need a part 2.
I know. Yeah, maybe we'll have to come back for a part 2. I guess at this point, both of us have been doing this for a while. And so to come to this conclusion at a stage in your business where you've made the mistakes, and I say that as the general you, as in both of us, I walked away from my business after 2 years for about 3 years because I did the same thing, right? I followed the plan that wasn't my plan. And as a massive introvert, was just dreading showing up, for my business, and had to just step back and help my partner with his business for a while and just step back from it all. And when I came back, it being a really big intention that it's like, no, we're doing it differently this time. We're not following those patterns of past overachieving you where everyone else is the expert, you're the expert, but because you have to position yourself as the expert. Yeah. But you have to listen to all these other people who are much further ahead than you because they're the experts in marketing and sales and funnels and all of the things. And so so because we've embodied all of that, it is so easy for us to both sit here and be like, oh, you just need to know yourself. You know, just don't do the things that don't feel right to you. But for someone who's maybe early in their journey, who is looking at that, they're maybe in that transition, they may be trying to balance the full-time job and thinking about starting something else, or they are just early on and trying to navigate even finding that attunement with their own inner guidance and coming back to trusting that when there is so much noise. And for those of us who are more introverted, we can be influenced by the energy of other people. So when there's lots of big energy out there, it can get really messy. Totally. Do you have any tips or suggestions for someone who is in that place where they're like, okay, this sounds great, but how do I even start trying to fine tune my own version of success and my own passions and my own business model of how I want to do it?
Yes, that's such a great way to say it as well. How do I fine tune, you know, because it's not a direct linear thing, is it? You know, and I think I'm not there yet. If I, you know, when you think about even 10 years in business, I'm like, I think I've just scratched the surface about what makes me tick. And that's exciting. That's exciting to actually not know it all. I used to be someone as a type A perfectionist and overachiever. I needed to know, you know, 2 steps ahead for me to do anything because that's the safe part. And I mean, that came also from, I think, from an insecure place of growing up in poverty and things like that. So that's fine. That comes with the story I'm trying to change as well for myself. Right. But I think in this, whenever we're doing anything new or thinking about doing something new, I think we need to give ourselves this sort of, I don't know, a space or what, however you sort of look at it. Like one of the things I love doing. So for example, a great story is me moving to Bali. Never meant to move here. Decade later, I'm still here. But in the beginning of time, I was terrified to travel by myself as a woman going to a third world country. I didn't even plan to come to Bali. I was just going to travel through Southeast Asia and see if I could do this remote work thing when remote work wasn't a hashtag just yet in 2012. But my brain was like, no, things are going to happen to you, blah, 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 blah. So it wasn't allowing me to have that space to test, explore, because it needed that certainty. And the only way I gave myself that permission to go for it is giving it this sort of bounded time. Like I'm going to check in at 3 months. I can come back at any time. I can, if I'm unsafe, I can come back. You know, if I'm not happy, I can come back. And just giving myself this pep talk of like, it's not forever, because the brain seems to think everything's permanent.
Right.
Like you can't make a mistake because if this will be our, you know, death sentence to something. It sort of has this very detrimental way of looking at things sometimes, because partly its job is to keep you a bit safe. It has the ego mind in there, right? It's not wrong to say it wants you to be secure and safe, but it's also not the thing that's going to allow you to expand your horizons to challenges and living a bigger life. You know, living a bigger life means doing things that are different, and that is scary. That comes, it's like the price of admission. You know, of a better life, right? Is that you need to feel some of these feelings, right, in order to know that you're doing something different at all. But it doesn't. I think we have to give ourselves this like, sort of. I want to say permission, but I have a better word in my head that I can't seem to think of right now. But it's like this gentleness to allowing ourselves to, you know, like children, when children say, I think I want to be an astronaut. We don't go, that's not a viable career. Johnny, you should really think about being an accountant. And, you know, we don't say that to children. We're like, astronaut, oh, good on you. Let's get you an outfit. Let's get you a science book. Let's watch a documentary on space, right? Like we encourage that wild imagination and we don't poo-poo on those streams. But as adults, if we're like, oh, I think I want to be a writer, I've never been a writer before, right? And right away we think really practical. I need a degree for this. I'm not allowed to do this unless I have that. And then we start to like, for lack of a better word, like cock block ourselves into, right? Like the dream. And
you stomp on the little plant, right?
Totally. You're just like not good to little Johnny there, right? Like you wouldn't do that if you were a child. And I think there's that kindness and gentleness and that playfulness that I think we need to cultivate or remember, because we always have had it. And that even as adults, we can play. We can take on an idea and just obsess about it for 30 days. Go and find out things about it. Go and talk to someone who's doing that thing. Go and explore ways that we could up-level our skills if we were to be better at that thing. Let yourself be in the world of yes. of that thing for
So
a bit.
good.
Right? Without an objective of like, it has to be a side hustle. It has to be my next career.
Right. Yeah.
Why? That is not, doesn't need to be the next question. The next question can just be, I just want to see what makes my little heart sing. I just want to see something that kind of lights some fire in my belly. I want to just see if there's something that sparks my curiosity enough to keep me on the rabbit hole of exploration.
Love it.
And see where that leads, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, hopefully that makes sense. That sort of more kinder, gentler approach to playing, that I think is that gray area that we skip because we want the solid business plan, the solid career transition plan, right? But I think having a bit of playtime, whether it's a quarter of the year, a month, whatever's the thing that makes you feel safe and easy enough to get started, right? Just let yourself be in that sandbox for a little minute. And I think that will give you more clues to knowing thyself a lot more than when we become an adult and try to plan things in very detailed ways, right? So make mistakes. So in the sandbox, you're allowed to fall. You like to scrape your knee. You're allowed to sort of, slip and land on your bum a little bit. That's the whole point, is to kind of just see what happens and see what sticks. And I think if we look at every experience, whether it worked out for us or not, or whether it got us somewhere or not, it is still insight. Knowing what we don't want is great.
Oh, I tried that. Okay, I'm done with that now. That was the wrong
put it
choice.
to bed. You can put it to bed. Exactly. Right. And then you can move on and never have to wonder again, could I have been a writer? Could I have been? Well, let's see. Try it on for size. Don't be a best-selling New York author. Just write a quick story on medium.com. Write a blog that no one else will see but you, right? Doesn't have to be, it's the act of doing that thing rather than the validation of other people that really matters to, I think, aligning ourselves back to a relationship that we've lost contact with. And that's all it is, right? A relationship with self that takes a bit of dating, takes a little bit of, it needs some time to get to know ourselves. So I think giving ourselves that permission of time is so important, instead of rushing it, as we have been told in such a hustle mentality world we live in.
Yeah, and the seriousness of it. Like, that feels like what the opposite is. It's like, you're an adult now, you need to be serious, you have responsibilities, and then we just turn our backs on that childlike wonder. And the curiosity. Oh my goodness, I love that so much. I cannot even express to you how much I love everything that you said, and I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I want to keep going, but I do try and keep these to a certain time limit. Thank you so much, Lydia, for coming in, sharing your passion and that's what you can tell when someone is in the joy of what they do. They just talk about it with such reverence, and not only are you just beautifully showing people how to do that, but embodying it and living it yourself. So thank you so much for that. For anyone who would like to connect with you further, can you just tell us, obviously all of the show notes will be available on the website, but for anyone who wants to check you out while they're listening, can you give them where they can find you?
Absolutely. Well, my little home online is screwthecubicle.com. Right on the homepage, there's a couple of great resources that people can start with. I have a great YouTube channel that actually has different stages of transition. So if you're in corporate transition, if you're in that phase of building or figuring out what your meaningful business is, to the growth of a business, there's videos there on a playlist for you to watch. And it's videos I've done since 2014. So you'll see an old me, a new me, but a lot of it is, I think, a really good place to just start understanding where to start, in your journey. That's going to allow you to be less overwhelmed, and also just do more of the things that matter to where you're at with your stage, rather than overachieve or over digest things that might be too, not as stress-free, right, to do when you do it that way. In my website as well, there's a really helpful and handy quiz that I always like to recommend, especially people who are really interested in building a business that is aligned with their genius zone and their personality types. So right on the top of the homepage, you'll see the quiz there, or if you go to screwthecubicle.com/quiz, that's where you'll find it as well. And that's a really great one to just get a sample of, like, based on, you know, who you are and what your style is of working with people. So yeah, those are my resources you can find on my website.
Thank you so much for being here and for just sharing so much of yourself with us today. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and we'll definitely have to think about doing a part 2.
Yes, I would love that. Yes, thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation.